Hello guys, welcome to my new video, and Blizzard decided to do some buffs, and I had to make a video about this because I really want to have a look at the classes and try to predict where they're going to land in the grand scheme of things of Mythic Plus and Mythic rating. Keep in mind, because they did do buffs to classes, I want to look at all of the best classes in raids and Mythic Plus, and all of the information, all of the data that I'm using here are basically statistics of real players doing content. There's not a lot of simulation here, so guys, I definitely encourage you to check out the links. They're going to be in the description below. So let's go and get started and look at the actual changes that Blizzard is proposing. Blood Death Knight. Bone Shield grants equal to 70% of strength was 50%. Do blood decays, do they need a buff? In my honest opinion, they do. They're one of the worst representation in Mythic Plus, or one of the classes that have the worst representation besides Prot Warrior. Now, I could argue that Prot Warrior should receive a buff as well because the community perception. I don't believe Prot Warriors are as bad as this graph says, because I do believe the Prot Warriors can handle their own. But the community perception is so terrible that getting invited as a Prot Warrior can be really awkward. The fact that Blood Decays are getting a buff, it is a much needed buff, because the meta right now in Mythic Plus is all about kiting. And if you have a mobile kiting class like Vengeance Demon Hunter, it's hard to compete as a Blood Decay that needs to be attacked or needs to attack in order to get their mitigation or get heals out and things like that. So I do feel Blood needed a buff, and I'm happy about this. I do think that Prot Warriors should receive something in the very near future just to improve their community perception and again invite them more in Mythic Plus. Using sub-creation data, and this is very similar to what Rated.io does as well, but it kind of takes based on a huge amount of runs ranging in difficulty between 12 and 22. So this is the success rate, how many people were using those tanks. This is a really cool website to showcase without being biased. Hey, this tank was used in a lot of keys and they succeeded, and again, this is why we put it S tier. You'll see that C tier is occupied by your Blood Death Knight and your Prot Warrior. And you can see that Vengeance is doing well, you can see Brewmaster is doing well. And this is for this week's affixes, so Fortified, Sanguine, Quaking, and Prideful. It can change from week to week. Brewmasters are really strong this week because Ring of Peace can knock out people out of Sanguine. So keep that in mind. Now, other changes. You'll notice that Mage's Frost, all damage abilities increased by 9%. So this is a big one. A lot of people were hyped about Frost Mages at the start of Shadowlands because they were playing really well. And they received a huge nerf before Shadowlands was released. To an extent that a lot of top-end mythic guilds were actually getting Frost Mages ready to go, because they were looking so strong. They received a huge nerf and now they kind of reverted. Now you get a Frost Mage huge buff. Now what's happening to Frost Mages? They're probably the least played class right now in the game in terms of high keys. But the problem is, Fire is one of the best classes right now, one of the best range specs. So all of a sudden, Fire Mages are doing really well, and a lot of Mages will have to, even Mages who really enjoy Frost will have to go Fire, because Fire's combustion windows every 1 minute or so are insanely strong, both in Mythic Plus and in raids. You can see Fire is actually one of the most popular range specs right now in the game when coming into plus 15 Mythic keys, along the side with Marksmanship Hunter and Balanced Druid. Balanced Druid is gonna climb for this week because they're insanely strong. And if we're looking at sub-creation data as well, and if we go down to a range tier list, you'll notice that again, you have your Boomkins, you have your Fire, and you have your Marksmanship at the top. Keep in mind, Boomkins are even better because you have to remember they have Treants. Treants are one of the strongest tank cooldowns that a range DPS can have. Because the meta is kiting, tanks are getting slapped around in terms of HP as they can get one shot. Depending on which trash pack you're doing on Fortified Weeks. And a Balanced Druid with Treants is actually insanely strong, on top of the fact that Balanced Druid is going to have Typhoon for Sanguine, making Balanced Druid probably the best DPS, by far the best range DPS, but probably the best DPS right now in this Sanguine, Quaking type of week. So definitely Balanced Druids are doing really well. In terms of rating, you have to look at Frost Mage, and Frost Mage is the lowest here. I'm not sure which data Blizzard is using to determine whether it's going to be Raid or Mythic Plus, but definitely Frost Mages needed a buff because they're the lowest Mythic performing specs right now. You can see Fury Warrior here, you can see Retribution, you can see Destruction. I don't think Blizzard really cares about Destruction at this given point, given the fact that Affliction is doing so well. You have to keep in mind that Demonology Warlocks here, it's a false representation because the amount of parses for Demo, there's only 400. while you compare it to Affliction, which is probably the most popular spec, or one of the most popular specs, with 33,000. Affliction is definitely the king for Warlocks right now. It's actually one of the strongest specs in the raid, and doing pretty well in Mythic Plus as well. So, Blizzard buffs, Blood Decays, very warranted. Protection Warrior probably should have gone a buff. Frost Mages got a buff, very warranted. Monks, Windwalker. Now, this change here is almost irrelevant. All damage is increased by an additional 2% while a 200 weapon is equipped. This is something to do with, and again, I kind of missed Frost here as well on purpose because I wanted to cover them all in one go. Brewmaster, all damage is increased by an additional 2% while a 200 is equipped. And Frost, all damage is increased by an additional 2% while a 200 is equipped. This is a fix that Blizzard wants to have between different types of weapons. There is a big disparity between using a one-hander weapon for a lot of these classes versus using a two-hander. Even if the two-hander is higher item level, people will be simming data and they're like, hey, this is not worth using a two-hander. So basically, Blizzard is trying to equalize the difference between the different type of weapons. Now, it is kind of weird to look at Windwalker, one of the top performing melee or classes in general, and Blizzard was more interested about fixing the disparity between the weapon types when you have other specs that are like 15% below the DPS of a Windwalker. I'm expecting more changes. Like, if you look at Windwalker right now, Windwalker in terms of melee DPS or DPS in general is really, really rising. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of Outlaw Rogues, there's a lot of Unholy coming up. But Windwalker is the one that's really doing well. Havoc is still doing, even though people perceive Havoc to be quite bad, Havoc is really, really doing well in Mythic Plus. And in raids, they have a guaranteed spot if you don't have a Vengeance Demon Hunter because of the 5% magic damage debuff. You have to look at, again, if we look at sub-creation data, you'll notice that in terms of melee, you have a Windwalker as one of the top performing specs right now with Outlaw. And then sub afterwards. If you look at this melee data right now, it's relatively irrelevant. Why? Because basically the meta right now is 2 range DPS. You need to have 2 range DPS and then 1 melee DPS. Seems to be the way to go. Now, by having 2 range DPS, your interrupts might be lacking, but you might have a Resto Shaman who has a really short range cooldown on their interrupt. All of a sudden, you're kind of covering all the bases with this. So that means if you're looking to build a proper Mythic Plus pushing team, you might pick 1 melee and you probably will choose between a Windwalker or an Outlaw Rogue at this given point. And then after that, you'll build it with a balanced Druid, Fire Mage, or Marksmanship Hunter. Maybe Affliction Warlock or Shadow in there might come in there. But generally speaking, this is the meta. And this is what most people are doing right now. Are these changes going to change? Especially the fact that, you know, you got your Frost Mages. We'll probably see. I think Mages will still go a lot of them will still go Fire, but I think a lot of them try to experiment with Frost, and I think that's a good thing. So, a lot of irrelevant changes in terms of bringing up the differences between weapons doesn't really affect anything. Windwalker is still one of the best DPS classes in the game. Brewmaster is still a very strong tank for raids and Mythic Plus. Assassination. So we're looking at a 8% all damage abilities increased by 8%. Assassination Rogue is one of the, again, very, very poor representation in Mythic Plus. You'll notice that you have here Outlaw, you have Sub, and Assassination. There's 7 Assassination Rogues that do plus 15 and up. That kind of tells you everything. Assassination's damage is, again, it's not too bad. It's the bottom tier, but in terms of the playability, Assassination Rogue is the least played Mythic spec in the game right now for Mythic Castle Nathria. So, Blizzard is trying to fix that. Is 8% going to be enough? I'm not quite sure, but I definitely know a lot of people who are happy that Assassination is getting buffed because they really like Assassination. Some people would say that they want Assassination, not just the flat out damage buff, but fix the gameplay type of deal. So leave a comment below if you feel Assassination needs more than just flat out damage buffs, which are by a lot of people considered to be kind of lazy. So generally speaking, Asa is getting buffed. For rogues, rogue meta, it's not as strong as it was in BFA. In Mythic raiding content, I'm not sure that rogue has a guaranteed spot in your Mythic raiding guild when you have things like Unholy DK and Windwalker kind of dominating the melee spots and dominating the DPS spots in general. And considering that melee spots are relatively hard to come by in Mythic Castle Nathria, inviting a rogue, it's not always a clear option. They do provide a lot of utility if you're doing Artificer and things like that. If you want to, you know, you might give them utility roles and things like that. But generally speaking, it's not as clear as in BFA. Even though if you look at the DPS performance in Mythic Plus, Outlaw Rogue is... There's a lot of Outlaw Rogues out there. I do feel that Windwalker is going to climb and overtake Rogues to some extent. I think Windwalker is the next kind of Rogue type of deal, especially with the 5% physical buff if you're building a melee team. If you look at the subcreation, like, again, I'm not bashing Rogues. Rogues definitely have their spot. All I'm saying is that I don't think it's as engraved as it was in BFA. So, happy to see Assassination Rogue buffs. We'll have to see how that's going to work out. Honestly, Rogues I think will be fine, even if Assassination is not going to be up the top. And lastly, Fury Warriors. And this is an interesting one. So, all damage abilities increased by 8% except for Bladestorm and Dragon Roar, which is the meta right now. Meat Cleaver talent now increases Whirlwind's damage by 25%, was 30%, so it's actually a nerf. Now, Meat Cleaver is not a meta pick. Whether it's going to be Mythic rating, where there is basically no one using Meat Cleaver, and for a lot of boss fights, you'll notice that Meat Cleaver's representation in terms of talent picking, it's like 3%. So it's extremely, it's not a meta pick. Even in Mythic Plus, it's not a meta pick as well. You'll notice that no one is using it for hierarchies as well. So I guess Blizzard was kind of scared about the fact that maybe all the damage buff might scale really well with the talent or something along those lines. But generally speaking, Fury Warrior is getting overall buffs. And the very early preliminary look at Fury versus Arms done by the Warrior Discord and things like that is indicating that possibly Fury Warrior might actually overtake Arms in pure DPS. Again, very early days. The difference between Fury and Arms wasn't huge already, so there is a chance that Fury is going to be in a decent spot again. Warrior specs in general are not doing all that well. A lot of people, including myself, might even say that Warrior right now in Shadowlands is one of the worst classes. I don't think Prot Warrior is as bad as people say, but it's definitely not in the meta. Arms Warrior and Fury Warrior, they have a spot reserved in Mythic Castle Nathria because they're warriors. They provide the raid with Battle Shout, which is very, very much needed, and they provide the raid with Rallying Cry if you don't have a Prot Warrior, which you might not. So all of a sudden, Warrior has a guaranteed spot in raids, but it might not be the best spot. So I am happy to see Fury getting buffed. Maybe Arms could have received the buff as well, but I think maybe Blizzard is a little bit scared about PvP changes. They recently have said they don't want a huge disparity between PvP and Mythic Plus in terms of how the spec plays, but we'll have to see. So generally speaking, these are the early changes to classes. How do I feel about them? I do feel it's better than nothing. I do feel there's a lot of classes that needed buffs. I do feel that there is a lot of underlying specs that are not doing well. In terms of healers, I truly believe that the actual balance is not that bad. At this given point, I think it's relatively safe to say that Resto Shaman is probably the best overall healer. Resto Shaman's representation in Mythic Plus. Who would have thought that Resto Shaman was going to be the most popular healer in Mythic Plus? If you're looking at the overall pick for 15 and up from Rated.io, you're looking at Resto Shaman being one of the top. If you're looking at subcreation data in terms of key completions and things like that, they're one of the top healers. If you're looking at the HPS, you have to remember that HPS is not the main way to measure a healer's performance, because Resto Shaman not only provides good HPS, it also has an insane amount of utility through things like Spirit Link Totem, through Windrush Totem. Again, they have APT, which Ancestral Protection Totem, which can be very, very useful during progression. Resto Shaman is probably the best utility healer, provides a huge amount of HPS, and is probably the most popular healer in Mythic Plus, on top of the fact that they're also very good in PvP. Should they get a nerf? I truly believe they shouldn't. I think they should have their time in the sun, at least for a little bit. How many people remember Holy Paladin in BFA, at least from the time that they got Glimmer? They were pretty OP for a lot of the expansion. So I do think Resto Shaman is a little bit overpowered, or probably the most powerful pick. But after that, I think the balance is pretty decent. Again, with subcreation data, you can see that all of the other specs are doing pretty well, with the exception of Holy Priest. Holy Priest, I feel, or priests in general, falls in the same category that, let's say, mages were falling into. If you're a mage, you're probably going to be playing fire, because fire is the best in all content. If you're a priest, and if you have an organized group that's pushing 22 keys, you're probably going to be playing the spec that has the highest chance of success. And in that case, it's going to be Discipline Priest. And in the same way, if you're doing Mythic Castle Nathria, you're going to be playing the spec that is going to give you the most success. Passive damage, damage reduction with barrier, Discipline Priest. Spirit Shell is absolutely overpowered in Mythic raiding right now if you use it properly. Big disclaimer, guys. Discipline is hard to play. These are really high keys. We're looking at Mythic raiding. We're assuming that in this case, you can play Holy Priest as well as you can play a Discipline Priest. If you're not sure, if you're not comfortable with Discipline Priest, there is no shame in playing Holy Priest. I think Holy Priest gets a lot of undeserved negative attention. I think Holy Priest hold its own. So if you can't play Discipline, I definitely, or if you prefer Holy, I think you can do well. But Discipline is definitely in the meta. And the healer balance is actually pretty decent with the exception of Resto Shaman maybe being a little bit more powerful than everyone else. And Holy Priest falling down in terms of Mythic Plus representation. And this is my summary of healers. You could probably also argue the point that maybe Mistweaver could use as some sort of buff. A lot of people have been complaining about the mana consumption of Mistweaver, which in Mythic Plus 10 plus up keys where you have Prideful, it's not that big of a deal if you can manage it properly. But generally speaking, a lot of people have been talking about Mistweaver, possible utility buffs or maybe something, a stronger niche, because in Mythic raiding, if you look at some of the world first skills, which I'm not going to show you right now, Mistweaver was not really included. Maybe there should be some sort of a damage reduction cooldown added. But these are some really big changes that are not going to happen until a big patch, or possibly not going to happen until the next expansion. So we'll have to see how Blizzard is going to respond to Mistweaver or their state in the current game. In terms of other changes, maybe Prot Warrior could receive a buff to increase the community perception. Maybe the underlying specs that no one plays, like Survival, Feral, could receive some love as well. They've always been very poorly played in terms of community perception as well. And again, I guess Blizzard has this mentality where if a spec can have multiple DPS off specs and things like that, if one of those specs is doing well, then the other specs don't really matter to some extent. But they are changing that. You see that rogues are getting buffs. You can see that they're trying to equal the performance of all the 3 specs. You can see that mages are getting buffs in terms of Frost, because Frost is really underperforming, but Fire is really, really strong. So Blizzard is trying to make those specs a bit better. I do expect more changes in the future, and I really want to hear your opinion about this. How do you feel about all of these class tuning changes, and do you feel something else should have been added? Do you feel there's a class that really needs a buff right now? Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. It helps me to continue with these videos, and I'll see you in my next